Melissa Gilbert was only 9 years old when the world first met her. With her freckled cheeks and gentle spirit, she became the heart of Little House on the Prairie, a symbol of innocence in an industry that rarely allowed children to stay that way. As America watched her grow up, she carried the weight of fame with grace, even as she quietly longed for something real, something beyond the lights, the scripts, and the image of perfection she was told to maintain. But behind that wholesome smile was a young girl discovering love for the first time. His name was Rob Lowe, Hollywood's golden boy, the face on every magazine cover, the heartthrob of a generation. Their love story seemed like a dream written in the stars, two young icons drawn together by fame and youth. Yet beneath the glamour lay fragility, a tenderness unprepared for the storms ahead. Decades later, Melissa finally speaks about first love, heartbreak, and the silence that followed. Melissa Gilbert was born in 1964 in Los Angeles, California, and from the moment she entered the world, her life was shaped by stories. Adopted by actor Paul Gilbert and Barbara Crane, she grew up surrounded by the hum of cameras and scripts, yet longed for the simplicity most children took for granted. Hollywood was her playground, but also her classroom, a place that taught her how to smile through exhaustion and to hide tears behind perfect lighting. By the age of 9, Melissa had already begun her journey in front of the camera. In 1974, she was cast as Laura Ingalls Wilder in Little House on the Prairie, a role that would define not just her career but her identity. Week after week, families across America gathered around their television screens to watch her laugh, cry, and grow up in a world of wooden cabins and moral lessons. For the audience, she was the image of purity and strength. For Melissa, it was both a blessing and a burden. Michael Landon, who played Charles Ingalls, became a father figure and mentor. He taught her about storytelling, discipline, and professionalism, yet his perfectionism often demanded more than most children could give. She adored him deeply, calling him her second family, and he in many ways shaped her into the actress and woman she would become. On set, she found warmth, belonging, and purpose. Off set, she began to feel the weight of expectations that came with being America's favorite daughter. The success of Little House on the Prairie carried her through her teenage years, but fame, especially for a child, can be isolating. While her classmates were worrying about homework and crushes, Melissa was memorizing lines and attending interviews. Her innocence was lived out on television, but her adolescence belonged to Hollywood. She learned early how to handle adults, how to hide insecurities, and how to keep smiling, even when she felt unseen. As the seasons of Little House rolled on, Melissa matured before the world's eyes. Yet, away from the Prairie sets, her real life began to feel like a performance she couldn't escape. She once described it as growing up in two worlds, the wholesome, loving one on screen, and the chaotic, uncertain one behind the scenes. There were moments when she longed to trade it all for a simple life, one without scripts or cameras, where she could just be Melissa. By the early 1980s, as Little House on the Prairie neared its end, she found herself standing at the edge of change. She was no longer the wide-eyed girl from Walnut Grove, but a young woman stepping into a world that expected her to reinvent herself. Hollywood was shifting. The gentle family dramas of the 70s were giving way to the fast-paced glamour of the new decade. For the first time, Melissa faced the question every child star dreads: who was she without the role that made her famous? She began taking on new projects, exploring film and television work that would separate her from Laura Ingalls. Yet inside, she carried the quiet ache of someone who had grown up too quickly, who had lived 1,000 emotions under studio lights. It was during this period of transition, when she was no longer a child but not yet a woman, that she would meet someone who would change the course of her life forever. His name was Rob Lowe. When Little House on the Prairie finally ended in 1983, Melissa Gilbert stepped into adulthood with both wonder and uncertainty. She had spent nearly a decade living as Laura Ingalls Wilder, and now she faced the daunting task of becoming herself. Hollywood was different from the world she had known as a child. The pace was faster, the stakes higher, and the faces around her seemed impossibly glamorous. She was determined to prove that she could survive outside the shadow of her childhood fame. It was in this new chapter that she met Rob Lowe. He was everything the 80s celebrated: handsome, magnetic, and rising fast. Fresh from the success of The Outsiders and Class, Rob was the face of young Hollywood, a generation that traded simplicity for allure. When their paths crossed, there was an instant connection, the kind that feels faded even when reason whispers otherwise. For Melissa, it was the first time someone saw her not as Laura Ingalls, but as a young woman discovering her own voice. Their relationship began quietly, away from flashing cameras, built on the innocence of two people finding themselves in a world that rarely allowed privacy. They were barely out of their teens, both carrying the pressure of public life. For the first time, Melissa experienced what she thought was love beyond the screen, a love that made her believe she could have something real amid the illusion of fame. Rob's charm was undeniable, and Melissa was drawn to his energy. Together they represented everything the public adored about young Hollywood, the promise of beauty, talent, and romance. But beneath that glittering surface were two fragile hearts, unprepared for the weight of attention that followed them everywhere. The media called them the golden couple, yet behind those headlines was a relationship built on emotion rather than experience, intensity rather than understanding. For Melissa, Rob became more than just a boyfriend. He was her first love, the person she imagined a future with. In many ways, she believed that he was the one. He was her first glimpse of what adulthood could look like. They shared dreams, laughter, and a bond that felt safe in a world that often felt unpredictable. But Hollywood rarely let love stay untouched. Fame magnifies everything: the joy, the fear, and the mistakes. And for two young actors, that glare could be blinding. As Rob's career continued to rise, his schedule grew chaotic, and the pressures of constant attention began to test them. Melissa, still learning who she was outside her television legacy, tried to navigate the relationship while building a life beyond her childhood fame. There were moments of tenderness, moments of confusion, and the growing realization that first love, no matter how pure, can be fragile in the face of ambition. They became engaged, a symbol of hope for those who believed in fairy tale endings. But love that begins under bright lights often struggles to survive once reality sets in. The world saw their smiles, the red carpet moments, and the perfect image, but Melissa felt the quiet distance that began to grow between them. Two young hearts, each pulled by their own dreams, began drifting apart. For Melissa Gilbert, that relationship would leave a lasting mark, a chapter of youth filled with beauty and heartbreak. It was a story that taught her how deeply one can love and how painful it is to lose what once felt certain. And when it finally ended, it left behind a silence she would carry for years before finding the courage to speak. By the mid-1980s, Melissa Gilbert's life had become a delicate balance between career, fame, and the love she believed would last forever. Her engagement to Rob Lowe had filled her with hope, a belief that perhaps she had found the stability that fame had always denied her. But that illusion began to unravel as quickly as it had formed. Hollywood was changing, and so were they. The bright lights that had once brought them together began to cast long shadows over their fragile connection. Rob's career was soaring. He was one of the most recognizable faces of his generation, starring in films that defined the decade. With each success came more attention, more distance, and more temptation. For Melissa, who had grown up in the disciplined, family-oriented world of Little House on the Prairie, the constant whirlwind of parties, premieres, and rumors felt overwhelming. She tried to hold on, believing love could survive anything, but fame has a way of testing even the purest hearts. Their arguments became more frequent, not out of anger but out of fear of losing each other, fear of what came next. She was in love with a man the world adored, and the pressure of that public spotlight began to crush the private moments they once cherished. Melissa later admitted that she could sense their bond slipping away, even as she tried to pretend everything was fine. When Rob eventually ended their engagement, it left her devastated. She had imagined a future together, one built on love and trust, only to watch it dissolve in silence. In her memoir Prairie Tale, Melissa described that time as one of the darkest periods of her life. She was young, heartbroken, and unsure of who she was without him. The end of their relationship wasn't just the loss of a partner, it was the end of the fantasy she had built around the idea of love itself. For years she had lived under the gaze of an audience that saw her as unshakable. But away from the cameras, she was just a woman learning that even the most beautiful stories can end in pain. As Rob moved forward in his career, Melissa tried to rebuild her own path. She threw herself into work, appearing in television films and projects that helped her maintain stability, but the emotional toll lingered. The breakup had stripped her of confidence, leaving her questioning whether love in Hollywood could ever be genuine. For someone who had grown up portraying family values on screen, the contrast between her professional image and private heartbreak was almost unbearable. Friends who knew her at the time said she carried her sorrow quietly, refusing to let bitterness define her. Still, the wound was deep. The public speculation surrounding their breakup added another layer of pain, reminding her that her personal life was never truly her own. The same industry that had given her everything had also taken away her sense of peace. With time, Melissa began to understand that her heartbreak wasn't a sign of weakness. It was part of growing up in an environment that rarely allowed honesty. She learned that vulnerability wasn't something to hide, but something to honor. That relationship had shaped her, for better and worse, leaving behind lessons she would carry into adulthood. The girl who once embodied innocence on the prairie had now faced the harsh realities of love and loss. Yet even in heartbreak, Melissa refused to let despair define her. She would spend years finding her footing again, learning to separate the woman she truly was from the image the world expected. And somewhere in that journey, she would rediscover her voice, the same one that had once made audiences believe in the power of resilience. After the heartbreak faded into memory, Melissa Gilbert began the quiet work of rebuilding herself. The years that followed were not marked by sudden transformation but by steady healing. She continued acting, taking roles in television, movies, and series that allowed her to grow beyond the identity of Laura Ingalls Wilder. With each performance, she reclaimed a part of her confidence, proving that her strength went far deeper than her childhood fame. In the early 1990s, Melissa's life entered a new chapter. She married actor and producer Bo Brinkman in 1988, and they welcomed their son Dakota the following year. For the first time, she experienced the love that came from building a family of her own. Yet the marriage ended in divorce in 1994, leaving her once again to confront the fragility of dreams. Not long after, she found companionship with actor Bruce Boxleitner, a partnership built on shared values and mutual respect. They married in 1995, and she gave birth to their son Michael, named in honor of Michael Landon, the man who had shaped her earliest years in Hollywood. Away from the screen, Melissa discovered another purpose. She became an advocate for child actors, speaking openly about the emotional toll of early fame and the challenges of navigating identity after stardom. Her experiences gave her a voice that resonated with others who had grown up in front of cameras. She served as president of the Screen Actors Guild from 2001 to 2005, a role that reflected her commitment to fairness and dignity within the industry that had both nurtured and tested her. But it wasn't until 2009 that Melissa truly lifted the curtain on her inner world. In her memoir Prairie Tale, she finally spoke about her relationship with Rob Lowe, the innocence of their beginning, the pain of their ending, and the growth that came after. For decades she had remained silent, carrying those memories quietly, but through writing, she found freedom. Her words were neither bitter nor nostalgic. They were honest. She acknowledged how young they were, how fame had shaped them, and how time had taught her compassion rather than resentment. Rob Lowe, in his own memoir Stories I Only Tell My Friends, would later echo that respect, recalling their relationship with warmth. The years had softened what was once heartbreak into gratitude. Both had lived full lives, found families, and built careers beyond the turbulence of their youth. For Melissa, it was never about reopening old wounds, but about acknowledging the truth of who she had been and how far she had come. Her later interviews revealed a woman who no longer measured her worth by fame or relationships. She had learned to value stillness, honesty, and forgiveness. Moving to New York and eventually to rural Michigan, she embraced a quieter life with her husband Timothy Busfield, whom she married in 2013. There she found peace away from the demands of Hollywood, focusing on family, writing, and advocacy. Melissa Gilbert's silence had never been avoidance, it was reflection. Speaking out after so many years was an act of self-acceptance, not confession. The girl who once represented America's innocence had grown into a woman who understood the cost of vulnerability, yet chose to live with openness anyway. Through heartache, reinvention, and grace, she found something more lasting than fame: the courage to tell her story on her own terms. Melissa Gilbert's story is not one of tragedy, but of transformation. From the little girl who lit up living rooms across America to the woman who learned to stand unguarded in her truth, her life has been a testament to resilience. She loved deeply, stumbled publicly, and rebuilt quietly. The heartbreak that once defined her youth became the soil from which strength took root. In finding peace with her past, she discovered the kind of wisdom that only time and grace can offer. Today, Melissa no longer lives for the applause or the perfection that once shaped her. She lives with honesty, surrounded by the simplicity she once portrayed on screen. The silence she broke was not about rekindling old flames, but about honoring the young woman who survived them. Her story reminds us that love can bruise, but it also teaches that fame can fade, but authenticity endures. Melissa Gilbert's journey through love, loss, and rediscovery is more than a Hollywood story, it's a human one. A story of a woman who found herself not through stardom, but through truth. For more emotional stories, check out this video.